Chapter 9. Leader Election, Part 3. The elders were somewhat helpless about this. Originally, recruiting Luo Chong into the hunting team was a special case, but now this kid wanted to run for leader. However, thinking of the terror bird he caught yesterday and the new food in the water, if he could really defeat Dolly, maybe it would not be bad to let him be the leader. Just like that, under the surprised gaze of the tribesmen, Luo Chong and Dolly walked to the center of the venue. Dolly looked down at Luo Chong, who was only as tall as his chest, with his eyes full of confidence and disdain, while Duer and Shuya had some sympathy. The friends watching cheered for Luo Chong. Dolly spread his legs and squatted slightly, doing a non-standard horse stance, waiting for Luo Chong to come to him. Luo Chong did not hesitate and rushed to Dolly quickly. Just as Dolly opened his mouth and laughed disdainfully, Luo Chong suddenly jumped up, stepped on Dolly's slightly bent thigh with his left foot, grabbed Dolly's hair with both hands, and bent his right knee to hit Dolly's chin hard. Bang! Before anyone could react, Dolly fell to the ground on his back, rolling left and right and groaning. The friends were stunned. One ear and Beast Fong's eyeballs almost popped out. The elder's fingers were trembling slightly, and the cripple sat down on the ground. You have to know that Dolly is the strongest warrior in their tribe. Even if he loses, he won't be killed instantly, and his opponent is just an underage child. Meanwhile, the little kid Luo Chong was silently pretending to be smart and laughing triumphantly in his heart. Haha, as a person from the 21st century, only a fool would compete with you in strength. You should know that the chin is a vital part of the human body. If it is hit hard, you will faint directly. The fact that you can still lie on the ground and groan is already amazing. The elder was very excited. He felt that something big might happen in the tribe. Perhaps this young man would lead the tribe to become stronger and stronger, so that the entire tribe would no longer suffer from hunger, cold, or threats from other tribes. There was no basis for this, it was just an intuition from the heart. Luo Chong defeated Dolly and won the position of leader, which was recognized by all the tribesmen. No one looked down on him because of his young age, as if this was the way it should be. Because Luo Chong brought them so many miracles in the past 2 days, the tribesmen had some inexplicable admiration for him. Dolly was still shaking his dizzy head, while the elder picked up the broken feather crown and looked at Luo Chong at a loss. The token of the chief that has been passed down for who knows how many generations is gone. This is so embarrassing. What will happen to the image of the new chief? It will be very shameful if other tribes see it. But he never expected that Luo Chong had damaged the feather crown on purpose. It was just a joke. He wanted to have a circle of feathers on his head. Was he going to be a non-lord? It is said that non-lords have very bad luck. He didn't want to wear that thing, not to mention that it was green. He definitely couldn't wear it on his head. Dolly slowed down and stood up unsteadily, obviously still unconvinced, and rushed towards Luo Chong amid the exclamations of the crowd, grabbing Luo Chong's head with 2 big hands that could easily grab him. Luo Chong frowned and was a little angry. How could he not accept defeat? He was so angry that he was embarrassed. When Dolly rushed to him, Luo Chong grabbed Dolly's 2 fingers with his backhand and forced them forward. Ouch! Accompanied by Dolly's howl, Luo Chong grabbed Dolly's fingers with one hand, moved sideways behind Dolly, and kicked Dolly hard in the leg. Dolly fell directly to the ground and was subdued by Luo Chong. As long as he struggled, Luo Chong would increase the force of his fingers. Within 2 minutes, even a strong man like Dolly had to succumb to Luo Chong's intimidation and begged for mercy with tears and snot. It was so painful. 2 of his fingers were bent and his whole arm was powerless. It felt like something in his arm was about to be torn off, and there was no blood. What the hell was going on? Luo Chong let go of the crying big fool and let him learn how to bend his fingers by himself. Then he glanced at the tribesmen around him with contempt. The tribesmen had dazed expressions, intimidated by Luo Chong's powerful military force, and no one dared to stand up and oppose. The elder was quite perceptive at this time and handed a few feathers to Luo Chong. However, the new leader turned around and went back into the cave before taking them. The crowd became noisy again. The naughty children cheered, celebrating their first victory over adults. Several main members of the hunting team gathered around Dolly and cracked their fingers to study why it hurt so much. The women discussed where they had seen vines before and asked the leader to teach them how to weave a few backpacks when they came back in the evening. The elders stared at the cave with a complicated look, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, the new leader appeared in front of everyone again with a new look. Luo Chong was wearing a simple deerskin coat with the front lapels crossed on the left and right sides and a snakeskin belt tightly tied around his waist. The biggest highlight was his head, or more precisely, his hairstyle. Her long black hair was tied up into a bun on top of her head, and the roots of her hair were fixed with a headband made of snake skin, on which was inserted a hairpin made of the thin bones of a terror bird. There was still some childishness on her clean and tidy face, but her eyes had a maturity that did not match her age. This look immediately made the tattered feather crown look inferior. Tying up the hair is a new style after Luo Chong's careful consideration. This tradition has been followed by the Chinese nation for thousands of years. It is said that it started from the Shang and Zhou dynasties, or even earlier. In the earliest times, it actually had no special meaning. The reason is very simple. The early farming peoples began to tie up their hair because it was inconvenient to farm with loose hair. Therefore, this is also one of the important symbols of the Han nationality, which is mainly engaged in agriculture. Since we are going to spread Han culture in this world, let's start with tying up the hair. As for the last dynasty of China, the wild boar skin of the Qing dynasty, let it go to hell. The head can be cut off and the blood can be shed, but I will never shave the yin-yang head. That dynasty is a shame for the entire Han nation. Looking back to the past, the eunuchs of the Ming dynasty could sail treasure ships and dominate the world. But when it came to the Qing dynasty, they began to cede territory and pay compensation, allowing the Russians of the Eight-Nation Alliance to pull the Chinese people's braids and humiliate them. Of course, these were all excuses Luo Chong made for himself. He also wanted to cut his hair short, but he didn't have any scissors, so he had to do this. Otherwise, it would be inconvenient to work. The most important thing was that he didn't want to wear that feather crown. The new leader's capable look immediately attracted the tribesmen. Under the tribesmen's starry gazes, Luo Chong walked into the middle of the crowd. There were no long inaugural speeches, and no one would understand them even if they were spoken. They only cared about how much food they could store before the snow fell, how many children would be born this fall, how many would survive, and how many meals of meat they could eat in the winter. The sun has risen, and the morning mist has dissipated. As the new leader, Luo Chong has begun to arrange today's work. The hunting team went out hunting, but Luo Chong would not go with them today as he had other things to do. No one objected to this since he was the boss now. The gathering team was readjusted. There were now 15 adult women in the tribe, 6 of whom were pregnant, and the remaining 9 plus the lame man made a total of 10 people. However, Luo Chong only sent 8 women to gather today. Now that they have backpacks, they no longer need the lame man to protect them. Each person can hold a stick and can protect themselves even if they don't have to hunt. Never underestimate women's fighting ability, especially primitive women. Anyone who dares to underestimate these women is a fool, and they are much stronger than people today. 6 pregnant women stayed behind to look after the house and take care of the 2- or 3-year-old kids, while the older children went to pull weeds. The remaining woman and her 2 boys were arranged by Luo Chong to go fishing, leaving behind a cripple with limited mobility. Luo Chong planned to give him another ideal. Thinking about this man who vowed to spend his whole life grinding a stone basin, Luo Chong felt sorry for him. In order to leave a stone basin for the tribe, even if he could never use it in his lifetime, he still silently paid. Therefore, Luo Chong planned to let him specialize in pottery in the future. Making pottery is actually very simple. As long as you don't pursue good looks, you can just pick up some clay from the river and make black pottery. It's not beautiful, but it's very practical. Everyone had work to do, but the lame man did not receive any task. He looked a little frustrated, but he did not want to sit idle, so he took out the half-finished stone basin and started grinding it again. Even children know how to pull weeds, and as an adult, he must contribute to the tribe, otherwise he will not be qualified to eat the food brought by others. Chapter 10. Smoked Meat and Fired Pottery. Luo Chong planned to arrange for the lame man to make pottery, but making pottery was not such a simple task and required a lot of preparation, so he had to arrange some other things for the lame man first. The fish caught yesterday had not been dried yet and had no salt, so it would rot soon in this weather. So Luo Chong told the lame man the smoking method, and they cleared the bushes in the open area around the cave, and then used the wet bushes to make a fire to smoke the fish. Smoked meat can be kept for several years without rotting. Even in modern times, some ethnic minorities in mountainous areas are still using this ancient method. Luo Chong demonstrated it to the lame man and then left him alone. He found a flat ground in front of the cave and started digging a hole. It was quite laborious to dig the soil with branches and stones, but it was much better than digging with hands. Besides, the soil here was very soft. If it was used to grow crops, it would definitely be a good land. Unfortunately, there was no crops to grow. The pit was dug to build a kiln. The kiln was not big and was divided into 3 layers, 2 underground and 1 above ground. The bottom layer was used to remove ash and let in air, the middle layer was used to add firewood to burn, and the top layer was used to place pottery. In fact, it was very similar to the field smokeless stove taught in the army, but it was a little bigger. The pit dug underneath is round, and water and hay are added into it to make mud. The soil from the pit is used to build the kiln, which is built directly on the pit. Local materials are used, and the kiln pond with grass is not easy to crack. The kiln pit is about 1 meter square and 1.5 meters high. The top of the kiln has a round opening to collect heat. There is a clay grate underground, which is a soil plate with many holes drilled in it. Stone bars and bone sticks are used to separate the fire pit and the air outlet. It took 3 or 4 hours to make this kiln, mainly because it was too tiring to go back and forth to the river to scoop water and stir the mud with a stone basin. It would be better to fire the pottery earlier, otherwise it would be too troublesome to use water. A wet kiln is useless, so Luo Chong asked the 2 friends who went fishing with him yesterday to light the fire. They burned all 3 layers at the same time, and also piled a layer of firewood outside. This way it would dry faster, and it should be ready for use in the afternoon. There is fire in the cave, and the fire in the cave will not go out because they don't know how to make fire. If the fire goes out, they have to walk a long way to other tribes to borrow fire, or even exchange it for things. After arranging the manpower, Luo Chong personally went to select the clay and make the pottery pots. Now this job cannot be directly handed over to the lame man. It is impossible to ask him to give up the grinding stone basin before he has seen the finished product. If the finished product is fired, he will rush to do it even if you don't let him do it. There is a lot of clay by the river. In fact, the riverside is full of clay. Even if the clay is used up, the soil that is often in contact with water sources will turn into clay. It can be said that it is inexhaustible. Nature is like this. As long as you are good at discovering, everything is useful. It just depends on whether you know how to use it. Soil can be used to make bricks, and sand can be used to make glass. As long as you are good at math, physics, and chemistry, these are not a problem. Of course, it is not difficult for Luo Chong, who graduated from the National Defense University, who has made explosives with his bare hands before. Find a relatively smooth and flat large pebble by the river to use as a workbench. Beat and knead the clay dug from the riverside. First pinch out a round mud cake, then roll some mud strips and stick layer by layer on the mud cake. Finally, shape it. Use your hands dipped in water to smooth the inner and outer walls. Repair the seams to make sure there are no gaps, and then put it aside to dry. The finished product is a small water tank with a small bottom and a large mouth. The bottom diameter is about 35 centimeters, the mouth diameter is about 40 centimeters, the height is about 50 centimeters, and the tank wall is 1 finger thick. Because there is no ruler, these data are approximate and not accurate. However, Luo Chong used a wooden stick to record the size of the tank to ensure that the next one will be the same size. In this way, 4 identical jars were made and placed next to the cave to dry. The friends who were stoking the fire watched them, and no one else was allowed to touch them, but there were still many people watching. Several pregnant women and children who had nothing to do were watching. The one who was standing in front was the cripple. He had nothing to do after he lit the fire. He had been observing Luo Chenglei's kiln just now, but he didn't understand anything. He wanted to study carefully the large basins made of earth by the new leader. This basin looked very deep and was larger than the stone basin in the original cave. He just didn't know if it could be used to hold water. It was still early, just past noon, and Luo Cheng went to the river to pick up 4 double-handled clay pots and ceramic bowls, as well as pot lids with handles. The pots were neither big nor small, with a diameter of about 1 foot, or about 33 centimeters, and a depth of about 20 centimeters, which would be considered a large clay pot in modern times. The bowl has a deep mouth and looks more like a temple alms bowl. The mouth of the bowl is as big as a palm. It is not for beauty, but for practicality. Luo Cheng made a lot of these things, about 20 or so, and 8 soup spoons. He himself didn't know how many finished products he would have in the end. When the things are done and cool to half-dry, put them next to the smoking fire to bake. When it is almost mid-afternoon, start loading the kiln. It usually takes 3 or 4 hours to fire pottery. If you start firing now, you can stop the fire in the evening. The 2 friends and the lame man were all watching. The new leader had made so many earthen basins in one day, but they didn't know if they could be used. Among the 3, the lame man was the most conflicted. He hoped that the earthen basins could be used, but he also hoped that they could not be used, otherwise all his years of hard work in grinding the stone basins would be in vain. Luo Cheng was loading the kiln alone. No one else could help with this job, and they didn't know how to do it. Loading a kiln also requires some skills. When firing pottery, it must be placed upside down in the kiln so that the area of the clay embryo that is in contact with the flame is the largest possible. The temperature is even, and both the inside and the outside can be burned. First, put the 4 largest vats upside down at the bottom. The kiln pit of 1 meter square can easily hold all of them. Then stack 4 double-handled casseroles on top. The remaining pot lids, bowls, and spoons are placed in the gaps between the vats and pots. The kiln is full. Hopefully, a few more finished products can be produced. A big fire was lit in the fire pit under the kiln. The 3-story kiln chamber was well designed, with the fire pit in the middle and the air inlet below. The raging flames penetrated through the grate and into the square kiln chamber. The orange-red flames shot high, and flames were steaming at the upper mouth of the kiln chamber. The kiln mouth above was covered with wet branches and soil, leaving only a small observation hole. Luo Cheng sat under the fire, fanning himself with animal skins and adding some firewood every now and then. He worked himself into a sweat on that autumn afternoon, but before he felt cold, his sweat had dried up again. This went on until evening, when the tribesmen who had gone out returned one after another. The women had a great harvest. The baskets they carried out were filled with unknown wild fruits, and the animal skin bags were also filled with a lot of pine cones and chestnuts, as well as large bundles of rattan, which seemed to be prepared to be used to weave baskets. The men also reaped a lot today, including 2 large birds that looked about the same size as turkeys, but no one knew what they were, as well as a dozen bird eggs, 3 snakes, and 5 large yellow-skinned rats, which should be rodents like groundhogs. Adding the more than 100 fish caught today, the entire tribe's harvest is still considerable. As long as the harvest exceeds the daily consumption, the rest can be saved. Autumn is the season with the most food and also the season for all things to reproduce. Seeing that those pregnant women are about to give birth, it seems that primitive people also follow the laws of nature and reproduce offspring in the season with the most food, which can greatly improve the survival rate of offspring. Wow, there is really no difference from animals. The fire in the kiln was fierce. Looking in through the observation port, the bowls on top had already turned red and white. That was about enough. If the fire continued to burn, the bowls would probably melt. There is no need to add more firewood now. Let it go out naturally and cool overnight. The kiln will be ready to be opened tomorrow morning.